The morning chaos at Sunny Meadows Elementary School was in full swing when Jake Morrison knelt beside his 6-year-old daughter Lily, smoothing down her wild curls and checking her backpack for the third time. His hands moved with the practiced efficiency of a single father who had learned to compress what used to be 2 parents' worth of morning routine into 20 minutes of controlled pandemonium. Lunchbox? Check. Water bottle? Check. That math worksheet Mrs. Peterson assigned? Check, Jake muttered, going through their daily ritual while Lily bounced impatiently on her toes, eager to join her classmates on the playground before the bell rang. Remember, kiddo, if you need anything today, ask Mrs. Peterson first, and if she's busy, find Principal Martinez. I'll be here at 3:15 sharp, okay? Lily nodded solemnly, her dark eyes serious in the way that children's faces become when they understand they carry more responsibility than their peers. At 6 years old, she had already mastered the independence that came from being the daughter of a man who worked 2 jobs to keep their small apartment and her school tuition current. Jake taught high school history during the day and drove for a ride-sharing service most evenings, a schedule that left little room for error or illness, but somehow managed to cover their basic needs. "I know, Daddy," Lily replied, adjusting the straps of her backpack with the careful precision she'd learned from watching him organize their lives around constant time constraints. "Mrs. Peterson said we might have a special visitor today from somewhere far away, someone important who wants to see how American kids learn math and reading." Jake felt the familiar flutter of anxiety that accompanied any deviation from routine. Special visitors meant disruption, and disruption meant potential complications for parents who couldn't afford to rearrange work schedules for unexpected school events. "Did she say what kind of visitor? Anyone I should know about?" "Someone from China," Lily said with the casual matter-of-factness that children used to discuss everything from dinosaurs to international business delegations. "Mrs. Peterson showed us pictures of where China is on the map, and she taught us how to say hello in Chinese. It's ni hao, but you have to make your voice go up and down like music." The information should have been routine parent-teacher communication, but something about Lily's pronunciation of the Mandarin greeting made Jake pause. The tonal accuracy was remarkable for a child who had never been exposed to Chinese language instruction, her inflection carrying the subtle musical quality that made Mandarin so challenging for native English speakers to master. "That's pretty good pronunciation, sweetheart," Jake said, though he had no expertise to judge Chinese language skills. His own linguistic abilities extended to high school Spanish and whatever French he'd absorbed during a college semester abroad that felt like a lifetime ago. "You must have been listening very carefully to Mrs. Peterson." Lily's expression shifted to something thoughtful and slightly puzzled, as if she were trying to solve a problem that existed just beyond her conscious understanding. "Actually, Daddy, I think I already knew how to say that. When Mrs. Peterson was teaching us, it felt like remembering something instead of learning something new. Does that make sense?" The observation sent a small chill down Jake's spine, though he couldn't articulate why. Children often experienced learning as recognition rather than acquisition, their brains making connections that adults had forgotten how to access. Still, something about Lily's certainty regarding Chinese pronunciation seemed to deserve more attention than he could give it, while juggling morning departure logistics. "Sometimes learning does feel like remembering," Jake agreed diplomatically, glancing at his watch and calculating traffic patterns to Jefferson High School, where his first period world history class would begin in 45 minutes. "We can talk more about it tonight, okay? Right now I need to get to work, and you need to get to Mrs. Peterson's classroom." As they walked toward the school building, Jake found himself studying his daughter's profile, searching for clues about this linguistic intuition that seemed to have emerged from nowhere. Lily had been with him exclusively since her mother's death 3 years ago, her early childhood documented in detail through his obsessive record-keeping and photo albums. There had been no Chinese babysitters, no exposure to Mandarin television programs, no reason for her to have developed any familiarity with tonal languages. "Mr. Morrison," a voice called from across the playground, and Jake turned to see Mrs. Peterson approaching with the brisk efficiency that made her one of the school's most effective first-grade teachers. "Perfect timing. I wanted to discuss this afternoon's classroom visit with you." Amanda Peterson had been Lily's teacher since September, a woman in her early 30s whose combination of genuine warmth and educational competence had made Jake's transition to single parenthood marginally less terrifying. She understood the delicate balance required to support children who carried more independence than their peers while ensuring they didn't sacrifice childhood to premature responsibility. Lily mentioned a visitor from China, Jake said, already mentally calculating whether he could adjust his afternoon ride-sharing schedule if parent attendance was expected or encouraged. "Is there anything I should know about the format or timing?" "Actually, that's what I wanted to discuss," Mrs. Peterson replied, her expression carrying the careful neutrality that teachers used when navigating potentially sensitive family dynamics. "The visitor is Li Wei Chen, CEO of Chen Technologies. She's considering educational partnerships with American schools, and Sunny Meadows has been selected as one of 3 institutions she'll observe during her week-long evaluation tour." The name meant nothing to Jake, but Mrs. Peterson's tone suggested that Li Wei Chen's presence represented a significant opportunity for the school. Jake had learned to recognize when Lily's educational environment was being influenced by factors beyond his control or understanding, circumstances that required his attention despite his limited ability to influence outcomes. "Will parents be expected to attend?" Jake asked, already running mental calculations about lost income versus educational opportunities for his daughter. "I can probably rearrange my schedule if necessary, but advance notice helps with the logistics." "Parent attendance isn't required," Mrs. Peterson assured him, "but there is one element of the visit that might interest you specifically. Ms. Chen has requested to observe classes where students demonstrate cross-cultural communication skills, particularly any children who show aptitude for language acquisition." Something in the teacher's phrasing made Jake look more closely at her expression. "Are you saying that Lily has demonstrated language aptitude beyond what I'd expect for a 6-year-old? Mrs. Peterson glanced around to ensure their conversation remained private, then lowered her voice slightly. "Jake, I've been teaching first grade for 8 years, and I've never encountered a child with Lily's intuitive grasp of linguistic patterns. When I introduced basic Mandarin greetings yesterday as cultural preparation for Ms. Chen's visit, Lily's pronunciation was remarkably accurate. More than accurate, actually. It was native level." The observation confirmed Jake's earlier unease about Lily's casual mastery of tonal pronunciation. "What do you mean by native level? Could she have picked up pronunciation from television or internet videos?" "It's possible," Mrs. Peterson said diplomatically, though her expression suggested skepticism about that explanation. "But Jake, she didn't just pronounce the words correctly. She corrected my pronunciation when I made tonal errors. She demonstrated understanding of grammatical structures that I hadn't taught and that weren't included in the basic cultural introduction I'd planned." The information hit Jake like a physical blow, not because it was threatening, but because it revealed a gap in his knowledge about his own daughter that felt simultaneously impossible and undeniable. He had been present for every significant moment of Lily's development since her mother's death, had participated in every parent-teacher conference, had supervised every homework assignment and playtime activity. Where could she have acquired linguistic skills that surpassed her teacher's preparation? "Has she said anything about how she knows these things?" Jake asked, thinking back to Lily's earlier comment about remembering rather than learning Chinese pronunciations. "Any explanation for where this knowledge might be coming from?" "She mentioned that the sounds felt familiar," Mrs. Peterson replied carefully. When I asked her to elaborate, she said that sometimes when she hears Chinese words, she understands them even before someone explains what they mean, as if the meaning exists in her mind already, waiting for the sound to activate it. The description sent another chill through Jake's chest, this one accompanied by a growing sense that his understanding of his daughter's capabilities and history contained significant blind spots. "Mrs. Peterson, I need you to know that Lily has had no exposure to Chinese language or culture that I'm aware of. Since her mother died, it's been just the two of us, and our daily routine doesn't include anything that would explain this kind of linguistic development." "I believe you," Mrs. Peterson said gently, "and I'm not suggesting that there's any cause for concern. Some children simply have extraordinary aptitude for language acquisition. What I am suggesting is that this afternoon's visit might provide some interesting insights into Lily's capabilities, and possibly some guidance about how to nurture them appropriately." Jake nodded, though he felt increasingly unsettled by the implications of their conversation. "Will I be notified if anything significant happens during the visit? Should I be prepared to answer questions about her background or development?" "Of course," Mrs. Peterson assured him. "And Jake, I want you to know that regardless of what we discover about Lily's language abilities, she's a wonderful student and a joy to have in class. This is about exploring potential opportunities, not addressing problems." As Jake kissed Lily goodbye and watched her skip toward the school building, he found himself wondering how many other aspects of his daughter's development contained mysteries he hadn't yet discovered. The morning routine that had felt familiar and predictable suddenly seemed fraught with unknowns, gaps in his understanding that might hold implications for Lily's future that he couldn't yet imagine. Driving toward Jefferson High School, Jake tried to focus on his lesson plans for the day, but his mind kept returning to Mrs. Peterson's description of Lily's linguistic intuition, native-level pronunciation, grammatical corrections, comprehension that preceded instruction. The progression suggested capabilities that went beyond natural talent or exceptional memory, pointing towards some form of prior exposure that should have been impossible given the controlled circumstances of her early childhood. By the time he reached his classroom, Jake had made a decision that surprised him with its clarity and determination. After his classes ended, he would use the internet resources in the school library to research childhood language acquisition, particularly cases where children demonstrated inexplicable familiarity with languages they had never been taught. If Lily possessed extraordinary abilities, he wanted to understand them well enough to support her development appropriately. More importantly, he wanted to understand them well enough to protect her from any complications that might arise from being a 6-year-old with capabilities that adults couldn't explain. The morning passed in a blur of lesson plans about European colonialism and American territorial expansion, topics that normally engaged Jake's passion for historical analysis, but today felt distant and abstract compared to the mystery of his daughter's linguistic abilities. During his lunch break, he found himself in the library, scrolling through academic articles about child language development and trying to identify any research that might explain Lily's situation. What he discovered was both reassuring and concerning. Child language acquisition was indeed a field full of remarkable examples of intuitive learning and accelerated development. Some children demonstrated extraordinary phonetic sensitivity that allowed them to master tonal languages with minimal exposure. Others showed pattern recognition skills that enabled them to extrapolate grammatical rules from limited input. However, the cases that most closely resembled Mrs. Peterson's description of Lily's abilities involved children who had been exposed to target languages during critical developmental periods, even if that exposure had been forgotten or suppressed. The research suggested that early linguistic imprinting could create lasting neurological patterns that facilitated later reactivation of dormant knowledge. As Jake read about early childhood language acquisition, a possibility began forming in his mind that was both logical and deeply unsettling. What if Lily's familiarity with Mandarin wasn't inexplicable after all? What if there had been exposure during her early childhood that he had overlooked or forgotten? The question sent him searching through his memory for details about Lily's first 3 years of life, the period before her mother Sarah's death, when their family had included routines and relationships that Jake had been too overwhelmed with grief to examine closely. Had there been caregivers, playmates, or family connections that might have provided Chinese language exposure? As the afternoon approached, and his thoughts turned toward the mysterious visitor who would be observing Lily's class, Jake realized that the day's revelations might be just the beginning of discoveries about his daughter that would challenge everything he thought he understood about their life together. Li Wei-chen arrived at Sunny Meadows Elementary School at precisely 2 o'clock, her presence immediately transforming the casual afternoon energy into something approaching formal ceremony. Jake caught a glimpse of her through his classroom window as he taught his final period of the day, noting the small entourage of school administrators and the careful way everyone positioned themselves around someone who was clearly accustomed to commanding attention and respect. She was younger than Jake had expected, probably in her early 40s, with perfectly styled black hair and a tailored business suit that conveyed authority without ostentation. Her movements were efficient and purposeful, suggesting someone who was comfortable in unfamiliar environments and skilled at processing new information quickly. Even from a distance, Jake could sense the intelligence and competence that had likely built whatever business empire justified her educational tour of American elementary schools. As his own students packed up their notebooks and prepared for dismissal, Jake found himself distracted by thoughts of what was happening in Mrs. Peterson's first-grade classroom 3 floors below. Was Lily interacting with their distinguished visitor? Had her linguistic abilities become apparent during whatever cultural exchange Mrs. Peterson had planned? Most importantly, how would he explain his daughter's capabilities if questions arose that he couldn't answer? The final bell rang at 3:10. Giving Jake exactly 5 minutes to reach the elementary building before the first-grade dismissal. He hurried across the campus, his teacher bag bouncing against his hip as he navigated between clusters of older students heading toward buses and parent pickup areas. The elementary building buzzed with the particular energy that accompanied special events, teachers speaking in hushed tones while students chattered excitedly about their brush with international importance. "Mr. Morrison," Mrs. Peterson's voice called from the classroom doorway as Jake approached, her tone carrying a mixture of excitement and something that might have been concern. "Could I speak with you for a moment before Lily comes out?" The request confirmed Jake's suspicion that the afternoon had produced developments that required adult discussion. "Of course. Is everything all right?" "Everything's fine," Mrs. Peterson assured him, though her expression suggested that fine might be an understatement rather than a comprehensive assessment. "But I think you should know that this afternoon's visit produced some remarkable interactions that you'll probably want to discuss with Lily at home." Before Jake could ask for specifics, the classroom door opened wider to reveal Li Wei-chen herself, flanked by Principal Martinez and what appeared to be a translator or assistant. The CEO's attention was focused entirely on someone still inside the classroom, her expression carrying the kind of concentrated interest that successful business leaders reserved for unexpected opportunities. "Ms. Chen," Mrs. Peterson said with careful formality, "this is Jake Morrison, Lily's father." "Jake, I'd like you to meet Li Wei-chen from Chen Technologies." Li Wei-chen stepped forward with the confidence of someone accustomed to cross-cultural introductions, extending her hand while maintaining direct eye contact. "Mr. Morrison, it's a pleasure to meet you. Your daughter is remarkable." The simple statement carried implications that Jake couldn't immediately process. "Thank you, Ms. Chen. I hope she was helpful with whatever cultural exchange you had planned." Li Wei-chen's expression shifted to something approaching amazement, as if Jake's response revealed a fundamental misunderstanding about what had actually occurred during the classroom visit. "Mr. Morrison, perhaps Mrs. Peterson could explain what happened this afternoon, because I'm not sure you realize the extraordinary nature of your daughter's abilities." The phrasing sent Jake's anxiety level climbing toward something approaching panic. What exactly did Lily do? It was Mrs. Peterson who answered, her voice careful and measured. Jake, when Ms. Chen introduced herself to the class in Mandarin, Lily responded fluently, not just with basic greetings, but with sophisticated conversation that demonstrated comprehensive understanding of both language and cultural context. She asked about my family, my business, my reasons for visiting American schools, Li Wei Chen added, her tone suggesting she was still processing the implications of their interaction. Her questions were thoughtful, her grammar was perfect, and her cultural awareness was remarkable for any child, much less an American 6-year-old with no apparent connection to Chinese language or culture. Jake stared at both women, trying to reconcile their description with his understanding of his daughter's capabilities and background. Are you saying that Lily conducted a business conversation in fluent Mandarin? I'm saying, Li Wei Chen replied directly, that your daughter speaks Mandarin with the fluency and sophistication of someone who has been immersed in Chinese language and culture from early childhood. Her pronunciation, vocabulary, and cultural references are all consistent with native-level acquisition. The assessment hung in the air between them, creating a silence that felt heavy, with implications Jake couldn't yet comprehend. Somewhere beyond the classroom door, he could hear Lily's laughter mixing with the voices of her classmates, the sound of a normal 6-year-old having a normal end-of-school conversation, completely at odds with the extraordinary abilities that the adults were discussing. Mr. Morrison, Li Wei Chen continued, her tone shifting to something more serious, I need to ask you directly, has Lily been exposed to Chinese language instruction or cultural immersion at any point in her development? Jake felt the ground shifting beneath his understanding of his own family history. Not that I'm aware of. Since her mother died 3 years ago, it's been just the two of us. Before that, our household was entirely English-speaking. I can't imagine where she would have acquired these skills. Li Wei Chen and Mrs. Peterson exchanged a glance that suggested they were processing information that didn't fit their expectations any better than it fit Jake's understanding. Mr. Morrison, Li Wei Chen said carefully, would it be possible for me to speak with you and Lily together? I have some questions about her language development that might help clarify how she acquired these remarkable abilities. Jake nodded, though he felt like he was agreeing to participate in an investigation into his own daughter's impossible capabilities. Of course, though I should warn you that I'm as confused about this as you are. Perhaps, Li Wei Chen replied with a slight smile, Lily herself will be able to provide some answers that neither of us has considered. 10 minutes later, Jake found himself in an empty classroom with his daughter and a Chinese CEO whose interest in Lily's linguistic abilities had transformed from professional curiosity into something approaching investigative intensity. Mrs. Peterson had tactfully withdrawn after arranging chairs in a small circle, leaving them with privacy for what she had diplomatically termed an educational consultation. Lily sat cross-legged in her tiny plastic chair, swinging her feet and looking between the adults with the patient curiosity that children displayed when grown-ups were clearly discussing something important but hadn't yet explained what it meant for her. Li Wei Chen had positioned herself at Lily's eye level, her earlier corporate formality replaced by the focused attention of someone trying to solve a puzzle that had personal rather than purely professional significance. Lily, Li Wei Chen began, switching seamlessly into Mandarin. Could you tell me about your favorite things to do when you're not at school? Jake watched his daughter's face light up with understanding and enthusiasm as she responded in what sounded like perfectly fluent Chinese, her small hands gesturing expressively while she spoke with obvious comfort and confidence. The conversation continued for several minutes, with Li Wei Chen asking follow-up questions that seemed to probe not just Lily's language skills, but her cultural knowledge and emotional associations with Chinese concepts. What are they discussing? Jake asked finally, his frustration with being excluded from his own daughter's conversation overriding his politeness about interrupting. Li Wei Chen paused their exchange, her expression thoughtful as she translated. Lily was telling me about her dreams. She said she sometimes dreams about a garden with red walls and golden fish in a pond, where an elderly woman teaches her to write characters with a brush. She described the woman's clothing, the smell of jasmine, specific cultural details that are remarkably accurate for someone who has never been to China. The description sent an unexpected chill through Jake's chest, not because it was threatening, but because it reminded him of something he couldn't quite grasp. She's always been a vivid dreamer. But I don't understand how she would dream about specific cultural details she's never encountered. Li Weichen turned back to Lily, continuing their conversation in Mandarin, while Jake watched helplessly from the sidelines. His daughter's responses became more animated, her voice taking on tones and rhythms that sounded completely natural, despite being utterly foreign to anything Jake had heard from her before. "Mr. Morrison," Li Weichen said, switching back to English, "Lily just told me that the woman in her dreams taught her songs about the Moon Festival and stories about dragons who protect children. She sang me part of a traditional lullaby that my own grandmother used to sing to me when I was her age." The implications of this revelation hit Jake like a series of connected dominoes falling. Are you saying she's recounting specific Chinese cultural memories that she shouldn't have access to? I'm saying she's demonstrating knowledge of customs, stories, and songs that are typically passed down through families over generations, Li Weichen replied carefully. The lullaby she sang is not something that would be found in children's books or educational programs. It's the kind of cultural knowledge that comes from intimate family transmission. Jake stared at his daughter, who had returned to swinging her feet and humming what he now realized was probably a Chinese melody. "Lily, sweetheart, can you tell me about these dreams you've been having? The ones about the lady with the brush and the golden fish?" Lily's expression grew thoughtful, as if she were trying to explain something complicated to someone who might not understand. "They're not regular dreams, Daddy. They're like visiting somewhere I used to live but don't remember with my awake brain. The lady feels like family, like someone who loves me very much and wants to teach me important things." "How long have you been having these dreams?" Jake asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer would complicate his understanding of their family history even further. "Forever, I think," Lily replied, with the casual certainty that children used to discuss their internal experiences. "But I didn't know the dreams were about real places until Mrs. Peterson showed us the pictures of China today. When I saw the gardens and the buildings, I knew I had been there before, even though you never took me there." Li Weichen leaned forward, her professional composure giving way to something more personal and urgent. "Lily, in your dreams, does the lady tell you her name? Does she say anything about your family or where you came from?" Lily nodded seriously. "She calls herself Nai Nai, and she says I am her precious granddaughter who had to go far away but should never forget where her heart began. She says the language and the stories are gifts that belong to me forever, even if I can't remember how I learned them." The words hung in the air between the adults, creating a silence that felt charged with implications neither Jake nor Li Weichen were prepared to address. Jake felt his understanding of his daughter's history cracking apart, revealing gaps and inconsistencies he had never examined closely enough to notice. "Mr. Morrison," Li Weichen said quietly, "I think we need to discuss the possibility that Lily's early childhood included experiences you may not be aware of. The linguistic patterns and cultural knowledge she's demonstrating suggest immersive exposure during critical developmental years." Jake's mind raced through memories of Lily's first 3 years, the period when Sarah had been alive and their household had included routines and relationships that he had been too busy with career and family obligations to monitor closely. Had Sarah arranged childcare that included cultural elements Jake had overlooked? Had there been playmates or caregivers whose influence he had underestimated? "My wife managed most of Lily's daily care during her first few years," Jake admitted reluctantly. "Sarah was more social than I am, more connected to community networks and parenting groups. It's possible she arranged cultural experiences that I don't remember clearly." Li Weichen's expression grew more intense, as if Jake's admission had confirmed a suspicion she had been forming. "Mr. Morrison, would it be possible for me to ask you some specific questions about your wife's background and the circumstances surrounding Lily's early development? I'm beginning to suspect that this situation may be more complex than simple language acquisition." The request felt both reasonable and invasive, touching on aspects of his family history that Jake had assumed were private and settled. But Lily's impossible abilities demanded explanation, and Li Wei Chen's expertise might provide insights that he couldn't develop on his own. "Of course," Jake said, though he felt like he was agreeing to excavate parts of his past that he had been content to leave buried. "Though I should warn you that my memory of that period isn't comprehensive. I was working long hours, Sarah was managing the household, and we were both focused on the present, rather than documenting every detail for future reference." Li Wei Chen pulled out a small notebook, her movements precise and businesslike. "Let's start with Sarah's background. What was her ethnic heritage? Did she have connections to Asian communities or cultural organizations?" "Sarah was Irish-American," Jake replied immediately. "Born and raised in Boston. No connections to Asian cultures that I was aware of. Her family was traditional Irish Catholic, very focused on their own cultural preservation rather than exploring other ethnicities." "What about childcare arrangements? Did Lily spend time with babysitters, daycare providers, or family friends who might have exposed her to Chinese language or culture?" Jake searched his memory for details about Lily's early care arrangements, realizing that his knowledge of Sarah's choices had been more limited than he had assumed. Sarah used a babysitting cooperative through her mother's group. Different families would watch each other's children on a rotating basis. "I don't remember meeting all the participants, but I assumed they were from similar backgrounds to ours." Li Wei Chen made notes while continuing her questions. "Did Sarah ever mention taking Lily to cultural events, festivals, or educational programs that might have included Chinese elements, museums, community centers, language immersion activities?" "Not that I recall," Jake said, though he was beginning to realize that his recall might be inadequate to answer these questions definitively. Sarah was interested in exposing Lily to diverse cultural experiences, but she usually mentioned major outings when she planned them. "What about Sarah's pregnancy?" Li Wei Chen asked, her question taking an unexpected direction. "Did she have any unusual cravings, language learning interests, or cultural fascinations during that time?" The question struck Jake as odd, until he considered its implications. "Actually, yes. During her second trimester, Sarah became obsessed with Asian cuisines and started watching Chinese cooking shows constantly. She said the flavors and techniques fascinated her in ways she couldn't explain, but I assumed it was just pregnancy cravings and nesting behavior." Li Wei Chen's expression grew more focused, as if Jake's answer had confirmed another piece of a pattern she was assembling. "Did she attempt to learn any Chinese cooking techniques or language during this period?" "She bought several Chinese cookbooks and tried to learn some basic food-related vocabulary," Jake admitted, the memory becoming clearer as he focused on it. "She said she wanted to understand the cultural context of the dishes she was preparing. But her language learning seemed casual, not systematic enough to account for Lily's current abilities." Li Wei Chen turned back to Lily, who had been listening to their adult conversation with the patient attention of a child accustomed to being discussed rather than directly addressed. "Lily, sweetheart, do you remember anything about your mommy cooking special foods or speaking different languages when you were very little?" Lily's face brightened with recognition. "Mommy used to sing to me in the language while she cooked soup with ginger and green vegetables. She said the songs would help me grow up healthy and smart. And sometimes, when I was sleeping, she would read me stories in the language, very softly, so I wouldn't wake up but my dreams could listen." The revelation hit Jake like a physical blow, not because it was devastating, but because it revealed aspects of his wife's parenting that he had completely missed or forgotten. "Sarah read to you in Chinese while you were sleeping?" "Not reading like books," Lily clarified with the precision that children use to correct adult misunderstandings. She would whisper stories about dragons and princesses and magic gardens, stories that felt like they came from her heart instead of from pages. Li Wei-Chen exchanged a significant look with Jake before continuing her questions. Lily, did your mommy ever tell you where these stories came from? Did she say anything about learning them from someone else? Lily nodded seriously. She said the stories were gifts that had been given to her by someone very special who wanted to make sure they didn't get lost. She said that someday when I was older, I would understand why the stories and the language were important for me to know. The explanation created more questions than it answered, but it began to sketch the outline of a picture that neither Jake nor Li Wei-Chen had anticipated. Sarah had somehow acquired Chinese cultural knowledge and linguistic ability that she had systematically transmitted to Lily during her early childhood, creating a foundation that was now manifesting as inexplicable fluency. Mr. Morrison, Li Wei-Chen said carefully, I think Sarah's cultural interests during her pregnancy and Lily's early years were more significant than either of you realized at the time. What I'm seeing suggests that Lily received extensive Chinese language exposure during critical developmental years, creating neurological patterns that are now reactivating as her cognitive abilities mature. Jake struggled to reconcile this explanation with his memories of Sarah as someone with no particular interest in or connection to Asian cultures. But where would Sarah have acquired the knowledge and skills to provide this kind of cultural education? She had no background in Chinese language or customs. Li Wei-Chen's expression grew thoughtful, as if she were considering possibilities that extended beyond simple language acquisition. Mr. Morrison, would it be possible for me to see photographs of Sarah from the period when she was pregnant with Lily and during Lily's early childhood? Sometimes visual context can provide clues about cultural influences that might not be obvious from memory alone. The request felt invasive but reasonable, touching on private family memories while potentially providing answers to questions that were becoming increasingly urgent. I have photo albums at home, but I'm not sure what you're hoping to find in pictures of Sarah with our baby. Sometimes, Li Wei-Chen replied diplomatically, people appear in photographs with individuals or in settings that might not have seemed significant at the time, but could explain cultural influences that affected their children's development. As their conversation concluded and arrangements were made for Li Wei-Chen to visit their apartment that evening, Jake found himself wrestling with the realization that his understanding of his own family history contained gaps and mysteries he had never suspected. Sarah's pregnancy and Lily's early childhood had apparently included cultural elements that he had failed to notice or remember, creating a foundation for abilities that were now emerging in ways that challenged everything he thought he knew about his daughter's development. The drive home felt surreal, with Lily chattering enthusiastically about her conversation with the nice lady from China, while Jake tried to process the implications of discoveries that were reshaping his understanding of their family narrative. How much of Sarah's life and interests had he missed while focusing on his own career and responsibilities? What other aspects of Lily's development might contain surprises that would only become apparent as her capabilities matured? That evening, Li Wei-Chen arrived at their modest apartment with the punctuality of someone accustomed to international business schedules. Jake had spent the afternoon organizing photo albums and trying to recall details about Sarah's activities during Lily's early years, a process that had revealed how much of their family life he had experienced without truly observing. Thank you for agreeing to this, Li Wei-Chen said, as Jake invited her into their small living room. I know these questions must feel intrusive, but Lily's linguistic abilities are extraordinary enough to warrant careful investigation. Lily had positioned herself on the floor with her coloring books, close enough to listen to adult conversation, but occupied with her own activities in the way that children manage to participate in family discussions without directly interfering. She looked up when Li Wei-Chen entered, greeting her in Mandarin with the casual comfort of someone continuing a conversation with a family friend. She's remarkable, Li Wei-Chen observed, responding to Lily's greeting before settling into the chair Jake had arranged beside the coffee table, where he had spread several photo albums. Her linguistic intuition and cultural awareness suggest exposure that was both extensive and emotionally significant. Jake opened the first album, revealing photographs from Sarah's pregnancy and Lily's first year of life. The images showed a progression of normal family milestones: baby showers, hospital visits, first holidays, routine domestic scenes that had seemed perfectly ordinary when they were created. Li Wei-Chen studied each photograph carefully, her attention focused not just on Sarah and baby Lily, but on background details, other people in the images, settings that might provide clues about cultural influences that Jake had overlooked. When she reached a series of pictures from Lily's first birthday party, her examination became more intense. "Mr. Morrison," she said quietly, pointing to a photograph of Sarah holding one-year-old Lily while standing beside an elderly Asian woman who had been partially cropped out of the frame. "Who is this woman?" Jake leaned closer to examine the image, his memory struggling to place the face that Li Wei-Chen had identified. "I'm not sure. The party was held at Sarah's mother's group community center. There were lots of people there I didn't know well. Friends of friends, extended family members of other participants." Li Wei-Chen continued turning pages, her focus sharpening as she identified several more images that included the same elderly woman, sometimes in the background, sometimes positioned more prominently beside Sarah and Lily. In one photograph, the woman appeared to be showing something to baby Lily, their interaction suggesting familiarity and affection rather than casual acquaintance. "This woman appears in multiple photographs over several months," Li Wei-Chen observed. "Her presence suggests ongoing relationship with your family rather than occasional social contact." "I wish I could remember more clearly," Jake admitted, frustrated by the gaps in his memory that were proving crucial to understanding his daughter's development. "That period was extremely busy for both of us, and I relied on Sarah to manage most of our social connections." Li Wei-Chen turned to Lily, who had been coloring while listening to their discussion with the selective attention that children use to monitor adult conversations. "Lily, sweetheart, do you recognize the lady in these pictures with your mommy?" Lily looked up from her coloring book, studying the photographs with concentrated attention. When she found the image Li Wei-Chen was indicating, her face lit up with recognition and delight. "That's Nai," she said simply, pointing to the elderly woman with obvious affection. "That's the lady from my dreams who teaches me about the moon festival and the dragons. Except she's not dreaming in these pictures. She's really here with mommy and baby me." The identification hit Jake like lightning, connecting Lily's dream descriptions to actual documented presence in their family history. The elderly woman who appeared in multiple photographs was the same person Lily described as her dream grandmother who had taught her Chinese language and culture. "Mr. Morrison," Li Wei-Chen said, her voice carefully controlled, "I think Lily's dreams may not be dreams at all. I think they may be memories of real experiences with someone who was genuinely important in her early development." Jake stared at the photographs, trying to reconcile the documented presence of this mystery woman with his complete lack of memory about her identity or significance. If this woman was teaching Lily Chinese language and culture, why don't I remember her? How could someone so influential in my daughter's development be completely absent from my recollection of that period? Li Wei-Chen's expression grew thoughtful, as if she were considering explanations that were both logical and difficult to voice. "Sometimes," she said diplomatically, "parents have different levels of involvement in their children's daily activities, particularly during early childhood, when one parent may manage most cultural and educational experiences." The observation was both tactful and devastating, highlighting how Jake's focus on career and financial responsibilities had caused him to miss crucial aspects of his daughter's development. Sarah had apparently cultivated relationships and arranged experiences that had fundamentally shaped Lily's linguistic abilities, all while Jake remained oblivious to their significance. The question now, Li Wei-chen continued, is whether we can identify this woman and understand the nature of her relationship with your family. Her influence on Lily's development has been profound, and understanding that influence might help us provide appropriate support for Lily's continued growth. As they continued examining photographs and discussing possibilities, Jake realized that the evening's discoveries were reshaping not just his understanding of Lily's abilities, but his entire conception of the family history he thought he had shared with Sarah and their daughter. 2 days after the photo album revelation, Jake found himself in a situation he could never have imagined. Sitting in a private investigator's office with Li Wei-chen, discussing how to locate an elderly Chinese woman whose influence on his daughter had been profound enough to create lasting linguistic abilities, but somehow invisible enough to escape his parental awareness entirely. Her name appears to be Chen Li Hua, based on the documentation I've found in local community center records, P.I. Margaret Santos explained, spreading several documents across her desk. She was a volunteer with the International Mothers Support Group that your wife participated in during 2018 and 2019. According to these records, she specifically worked with new mothers who expressed interest in multilingual child development. Jake stared at the paperwork, feeling like an archaeologist, uncovering artifacts from his own life that he should have remembered, but somehow didn't. Sarah never mentioned working with anyone on multilingual development. She talked about the mothers group as social support, not educational programming. Li Wei-chen leaned forward, studying the documents with focused attention. The records indicate that Mrs. Chen offered cultural enrichment services to interested families, traditional storytelling, lullaby instruction, basic language exposure for infants and toddlers. It appears your wife signed up for regular sessions, beginning when Lily was 6 months old. Regular sessions, Jake repeated, the words feeling foreign in his mouth. How regular? How did I not know about regular sessions with a Chinese cultural instructor? According to the scheduling logs, Margaret Santos replied diplomatically, the sessions occurred Tuesday and Thursday afternoons while you were at work. Mrs. Chen would visit participating families in their homes, providing one-on-one cultural education that was designed to be integrated into normal childcare routines. The information hit Jake like a series of connected revelations, each one highlighting how much of Sarah's daily life with Lily had occurred beyond his awareness or involvement. Tuesday and Thursday afternoons for over a year, while he taught high school students about European history and assumed his wife was managing routine infant care with perhaps occasional social visits. Is Mrs. Chen still in the area? Li Wei-chen asked, her voice carrying an urgency that suggested personal stakes beyond professional curiosity. The sessions she provided to Lily appear to have been exceptionally effective. Her linguistic development is remarkable. Margaret Santos consulted her notes before responding. That's where this situation becomes more complicated. Mrs. Chen stopped volunteering with the Mothers Group in late 2019, shortly before your wife's death. According to the program coordinator, she returned to China to care for a sick family member. There's no current contact information in the local records. So the woman who taught my daughter fluent Mandarin disappeared from our lives just before Sarah died, and I never noticed because I never knew she existed in the first place, Jake said, his voice carrying a mixture of frustration and self-recrimination. What kind of father doesn't know about his child's primary cultural education? Li Wei-chen's expression grew sympathetic, rather than judgmental. Mr. Morrison, you were working to support your family while your wife managed household and childcare responsibilities. Many parents divide duties this way, and it's not uncommon for one parent to be less involved in specific aspects of their children's early development. The reassurance felt hollow compared to the magnitude of what Jake was learning about his own family history. But this wasn't just childcare. This was systematic cultural education that shaped Lily's cognitive development in ways that are still influencing her abilities 3 years later. How could something so significant be invisible to me? Sometimes, Margaret Santos observed, the most important influences in children's lives are the ones that feel most natural and integrated into daily routines. If Mrs. Chen's visits coincided with your work schedule and your wife treated them as normal childcare activities, there would have been no reason for the extraordinary nature of the education to be obvious. Li Wei Chen had been studying the documentation while the others talked, her focus particularly intense on a section that appeared to contain biographical information about Mrs. Chen. Margaret, does this file include any details about Mrs. Chen's background or her reasons for volunteering with American families? Some basic information, Margaret replied, pulling out additional pages. Chen Lihua, age 67 at the time she began volunteering. Retired teacher from Beijing, moved to the United States in 2017 to live near her son's family. She had extensive experience in early childhood language development and wanted to continue working with children during her retirement. Did she work with other families, or was Lily her only student? Jake asked, wondering whether his daughter's linguistic abilities were unique or part of a broader pattern of success with Mrs. Chen's methods. She worked with several families, Margaret confirmed, but the record suggests that Lily was her most consistent and longest-running student. Most families participated for a few months before other obligations interfered. Your wife maintained regular sessions for over a year. Li Wei Chen looked up from the documents, her expression thoughtful. Mr. Morrison, I think the duration and consistency of Mrs. Chen's work with Lily explains the depth of her linguistic development. Most childhood language exposure is brief and intermittent. What Lily received was sustained, systematic cultural education during critical neurological development years. Jake tried to imagine Sarah organizing this comprehensive educational program while he remained completely unaware of its existence. Did Sarah understand what she was arranging? Was she deliberately creating this kind of intensive language learning environment? Based on these notes, Margaret Santos said, reading from Mrs. Chen's evaluation forms, your wife was very committed to providing Lily with multicultural awareness and linguistic flexibility. Mrs. Chen's reports describe Sarah as an engaged parent who specifically requested advanced cultural education rather than just basic language exposure. The revelation that Sarah had actively sought comprehensive Chinese cultural education for their daughter added another layer to Jake's evolving understanding of his wife's priorities and interests. Sarah was more intentional about Lily's development than I realized. She was building something specific, not just providing general enrichment. Li Wei Chen's attention had shifted back to the biographical information about Mrs. Chen, her expression growing increasingly focused. Margaret, does this file include any information about Mrs. Chen's son or the family she moved here to live near? Limited information, Margaret replied. Her son's name is listed as Chen Wei Ming, and the address she provided for emergency contact was in the Westfield neighborhood. But that information is 3 years old, and there's no indication whether the family is still at that location. Jake watched Li Wei Chen's reaction to this information, noting that her interest seemed to be shifting from professional curiosity to something more personal and urgent. Ms. Chen, do you know something about Mrs. Chen or her family that might help us locate her? Li Wei Chen was quiet for a moment, as if processing possibilities that were both logical and unexpected. Mr. Morrison, Chen Wei Ming is not an uncommon name, but combined with the timeline and location, I think Mrs. Chen Lihua might be my grandmother. The statement hung in the air between them, creating a silence that felt charged with implications none of them had anticipated. Jake stared at Li Wei Chen, trying to reconcile the successful CEO sitting across from him with the possibility that she was genetically connected to the mystery woman who had shaped his daughter's development. Your grandmother, Jake repeated, his voice barely above a whisper. You think the woman who taught Lily Chinese is your grandmother? The biographical details match what I know about my father's mother, Li Wei Chen explained, her professional composure giving way to personal emotion. She was a retired teacher in Beijing who moved to the United States to live with my father's family in 2017. She had always been passionate about cultural education and language preservation. Margaret Santos leaned forward, clearly intrigued by this unexpected development. Ms. Chen, if Mrs. Chen Li Hua is your grandmother, do you have current contact information? Do you know whether she returned to China permanently or if she might still be accessible? She did return to Beijing to care for my great-aunt, Li Wei Chen confirmed, but she comes back to visit my father's family several times a year. Her next visit is scheduled for next month. She paused, looking directly at Jake. Mr. Morrison, if you're willing, I think we could arrange for Lily to meet her Nai again. Not just in dreams, but in person. The possibility of reconnecting Lily with the woman who had been such a profound influence during her early childhood felt both thrilling and terrifying. Jake wasn't sure he was prepared for the emotional complexity of facilitating a reunion between his daughter and someone whose existence he had never acknowledged or appreciated. What would that mean for Lily? Jake asked carefully. She's built her understanding of Nai around dream memories and cultural stories. Meeting the actual person might be overwhelming or confusing. Or it might provide closure and continuity that she's been subconsciously seeking, Li Wei Chen suggested. Her linguistic abilities and cultural knowledge are clearly seeking expression and development. Reconnecting with their source might help her integrate these capabilities into her conscious identity. Jake thought about Lily's excitement when discussing her dreams of Nai, the joy and affection in her voice when she described learning about dragons and moon festivals from the elderly woman who felt like family. Would your grandmother want to see Lily again? Does she remember her students from the mothers group? My grandmother remembers every child she's ever taught, Li Wei Chen replied with obvious affection and pride. She talks about her American students frequently, wondering how they're developing and whether they've maintained connection to the cultural knowledge she shared with them. As they discussed practical arrangements for a potential reunion, Jake realized that the mystery of Lily's linguistic abilities was evolving into something much more significant, an opportunity to restore connections that had been severed by circumstances and his own inattention, creating possibilities for his daughter's continued growth that he never could have imagined. 3 weeks later, Jake found himself in his apartment, preparing for what might be one of the most important visits of Lily's young life. Li Wei Chen had arranged for her grandmother to come for tea, a simple social gathering that would allow Lily and Mrs. Chen to reconnect without the pressure of formal educational expectations or cultural performance. Lily had been vibrating with excitement since learning about the planned visit, spending days practicing Chinese greetings and preparing artwork to show her dream grandmother who was about to become real again. Her anticipation was infectious, making Jake realize how much this connection meant to her emotional development and sense of identity. "Daddy, do you think Nai will remember the songs she taught me?" Lily asked for the 5th time that morning, brushing her hair with special care and choosing her favorite dress for the occasion. "Do you think she'll be proud of how well I remember the stories about the dragons?" "I think she'll be amazed by how much you've grown and how well you've preserved everything she taught you," Jake replied, though his own anxiety about the visit was making it difficult to maintain confident reassurance. He still felt intimidated by the prospect of meeting the woman whose influence on his daughter had been so profound while remaining completely invisible to him. The doorbell rang at precisely 3 o'clock, and Jake opened it to find Li Wei Chen standing beside an elderly Chinese woman whose face was immediately familiar from the photographs they had discovered weeks earlier. Mrs. Chen Li Hua was smaller and more fragile than Jake had expected, but her eyes were bright with intelligence and warmth that made her presence immediately welcoming rather than intimidating. "Mrs. Chen," Jake said, extending his hand in greeting, "thank you for coming to meet Lily again. I'm Jake Morrison, Lily's father. I'm embarrassed to admit that I don't remember meeting you during your work with my wife, but I'm grateful for everything you did for our daughter." Mrs. Chen accepted his handshake with gentle dignity, her English accented but clear. "Mr. Morrison, there is no embarrassment necessary. You were working hard to provide for your family, while Sarah and I focused on Lily's early development. We all contribute to children's growth in different ways." Before Jake could respond, Lily appeared in the doorway, her face glowing with recognition and joy as she saw the woman from her dreams standing in their living room. She approached Mrs. Chen with careful steps, as if afraid that moving too quickly might cause her to disappear again. "Nai," Lily whispered, switching seamlessly into Mandarin as she had done weeks earlier with Li Wei Chen. "You're really here. You're not just in my dreams anymore." Mrs. Chen's composure cracked as she knelt to embrace Lily, tears streaming down her face as she responded in rapid Mandarin that Jake couldn't understand, but could feel the emotional intensity of every word. Li Wei Chen translated quietly, explaining that her grandmother was expressing amazement at how much Lily had grown and how perfectly she had maintained her Chinese language abilities. "She's telling Lily that she has thought about her every day since she left, that she prayed Lily would remember the cultural gifts they shared together," Li Wei Chen explained, her own eyes bright with tears. "She's saying that Lily's beautiful Chinese pronunciation proves that language learning rooted in love never truly disappears." As Jake watched his daughter reconnect with the woman who had been such a formative influence during her early childhood, he felt something shift in his understanding of family, memory, and the ways that love could transcend physical presence. Mrs. Chen had given Lily cultural roots that had sustained her through years of separation, creating capabilities that were now enabling new relationships and opportunities he never could have anticipated. The afternoon progressed with Mrs. Chen, and Lily engaged in animated conversation that flowed between Mandarin and English, with Li Wei Chen serving as translator when Jake needed clarification about their discussions. They talked about Lily's school experiences, her dreams and aspirations, her memories of the cultural stories and songs that had sustained her connection to Chinese traditions. "Nai wants to know if you would like to continue learning about Chinese culture," Li Wei Chen translated after an extended exchange between Mrs. Chen and Lily. "She says that Lily's foundation is excellent, but there is so much more she could learn if she's interested in developing her abilities further." Jake looked at his daughter, whose face was radiant with possibility and excitement. "What do you think, Lily? Would you like to keep learning Chinese with Nai?" "More than anything," Lily replied immediately, then switched to Mandarin to address Mrs. Chen directly. Their conversation continued for several minutes, with both of them gesturing expressively and laughing with obvious delight in their renewed connection. "They're planning lessons," Li Wei Chen explained to Jake. "My grandmother says she can work with Lily during her visits to the United States, and she can arrange for video lessons when she's in Beijing. She's also suggesting that Lily might benefit from connections with other Chinese American children who are maintaining their cultural heritage." As the visit concluded and arrangements were made for regular lessons and cultural activities, Jake realized that the mystery of Lily's linguistic abilities had evolved into something much more valuable, a restored relationship that would provide his daughter with cultural identity and educational opportunities he never could have created on his own. 6 months later, Jake sat in the audience at Lily's school, watching her perform in a multicultural celebration where she served as the student presenter for Chinese New Year traditions. Her fluency and cultural knowledge had continued developing under Mrs. Chen's guidance, but more importantly, her confidence and sense of identity had blossomed through reconnection with her cultural roots. Li Wei Chen sat beside him, having become a regular presence in their lives through her grandmother's renewed relationship with Lily. What had begun as an investigation into inexplicable linguistic abilities had evolved into a friendship that enriched all their lives, while providing Lily with adult mentors who understood both her American upbringing and her Chinese cultural heritage. "She's remarkable," Li Wei Chen said quietly as they watched Lily explain the significance of dragon dances to her classmates in both English and Mandarin. "My grandmother says Lily has the rare gift of cultural bridge building, the ability to help others understand connections between different traditions and ways of thinking," Jake nodded, feeling proud of his daughter's achievements, but also grateful for the journey that had led them to this moment. The mystery of her linguistic abilities had revealed gaps in his own understanding of their family history, but it had also opened doors to relationships and opportunities that were enriching Lily's development in ways he never could have anticipated. As Lily concluded her presentation to enthusiastic applause from students, teachers, and parents, Jake realized that sometimes the most important discoveries about our children come not from observing their current capabilities, but from understanding the hidden influences that shaped their development before we were wise enough to pay attention. The little girl who had spoken perfect Mandarin to a surprised CEO had become a bridge between cultures, carrying forward traditions that connected her to a broader human family while maintaining the strong foundation of love and support that Jake continued to provide as her devoted father. In learning about Lily's hidden abilities, Jake had discovered not just his daughter's remarkable capabilities, but his own capacity to embrace relationships and opportunities that expanded their family in directions he never could have planned, but was grateful to explore. Single Dad 1, Pure Stories.